Right, good morning, guys. We're going to wait for a few more people to drift their way in. I know some of them are enjoying their coffee break. So we're going to kick things off. I'm very happy to be back here. I think it's my first post-COVID physical conference. Show of hands, how many of you are doing it for the first time since the outbreak of COVID? So pretty much all of you. Fantastic, fantastic. So we're going to get things started. Before we do that, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Waseem Afzal. I've spent 15 years with Omnicom Media Group in the region in a variety of leadership roles. 2020 was a positive year, no pun intended for me personally. Found the courage to move to the other side of the fence and joined ByteDance and TikTok to run the ecosystem and agency development practice across the wider region. When we talk about the wider ecosystem for us, it basically dissects into building meaningful partnerships with media agency partners, creative agency partners, and a whole host of actors from management consultancies to VCs to MarTech players, as well as industry associations. Before I kick off with the topic, I want to walk you guys through the format. Right? It is a very interesting concept that Media Quest has brought to the region, which is a Fishbowl Chat. It is almost the reverse of a panel discussion, whereby we encourage all of our attendees to have an active role in steering the conversation forward. You guys can see the topic behind me, so we are going to make sure that each one of you have an active role in shaping up this conversation over the next 45 minutes. And before I jump into the topic itself, because it's a smaller group of people, why don't we do a quick show of hands of who's who, so that we get a feel of who are we talking to. Maybe if you guys want to just raise your hand up, tell us your name, your brand that you're representing, and your role within that company. Go for it.
I work on Nescafe and KitKat brands on the client servicing role.
Fantastic. Great to have you.
Hello, how are you? So I'm Lynn, I'm in publicist as well. I work on Nido and on L'Oréal as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Hello. Yeah. I'm Renoir. I also work at Publicis, and we mainly focus on Nestlé. My biggest client is Maggie, and nice to meet you all.
Brilliant. Great to have you guys.
Hey guys, I'm Elias. I'm also in Publicis Middle East. I handle pretty much across the board all the other accounts. So, KitKat, Nescafe, Nido, what have you. So all these brands, I tend to work on them too.
Hello, my name is Tahir. I am from Americana Foods. So I head up the digital marketing for the restaurant business, and I also manage the marketing for the cloud kitchen business, which we have just launched.
Fantastic. Tahir, great to have you.
Hello, my name is Heba Said. I'm the strategy and marketing leader for IBM Middle East and Africa.
Great to see you again, Heba.
Hi, my name is Randa. I work at Mindspace Account Director, and I work on PepsiCo.
Started my career out of OMD working on the PepsiCo business.
Hi, my name is Carl, and I'm the brand manager of Lipton at Unilever.
Fantastic, Carl.
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm heading up digital and media for Bayer Consumer Health.
Hello, I'm Irish. I work for a MarTech company, so I don't have any brands. But I work for customer data platform. So yeah,
Brilliant.
I'm the techie.
Brilliant. Great to have you here with us. And seat number 5. Ma'am, if you could introduce yourself.
Now I realize there's a number here.
We are in a cinema, right?
I'm Rania Khouri. I'm the head of marketing for Schumart within Landmark Group.
Fantastic. All right, guys. So I think let me walk you guys through the journey that a lot of you will resonate. Sachin, we briefly met, so we were just doing a quick round of introductions to get a feel of who's in the room. If you look at the industry at large, over the last decade or so, right, couple of decades, every other decade, the industry has seen a paradigm shift in media consumption habits and technological advancements, as well as the overall fabric of the landscape, whether in our region or any other region globally. But if I were to really break them down into 4 broader themes over the last 2 decades, going back to the early 2000s, you would see the age of Yahoos of the world, which would give out information in a very contextually structured manner, where as audiences, we were recipients of information that was given out to us in a contextually relevant environment. If you're interested in political news, you go into political sections of a website, and so on. Then came the knowledge graph, which was very much driven by the rise of the search engines, whether it was Googles of the world or it was Bings of the world, but it was based on what you were looking for and delivering on the search intent signals that we were seeing on the search platforms. And that very quickly became the gateway to information. At one point in time, we realized that a lot of the people, it became so habitual for them to actually go back to a search engine and then find out information that they were looking for. The third wave of change that the industry saw was the social signals age, the social graph, which was driven by a lot of the social platforms that are still very dominant in terms of usage, whereby you cared about what your friends and your followers and people you were connected to were consuming on their feeds, and therefore that information was then delivered to you as a customized experience. The fourth wave of change that we are in, and which is what very nicely links me to the company that I'm representing today, ByteDance, is the content graph age. Why is it so important and so instrumental in today's day and age from an engagement point of view? This age, this graph, the content graph phenomena in particular was actually instigated by the likes of Netflix, whereby the consumption of the platform was driven by the very strong, robust, suggestive recommendation engine on, you've watched this, what else are you interested to watch moving forward? Before that, it was driven by the Amazons of the world from a product recommendation engine point of view. And now, when you look at what's happening in terms of the experience that's being given out on TikTok as a platform, is very much driven about what is being consumed by the community at large, not necessarily by the people that you're connected to. So if you look at the changes, the 4 waves of change, there's one underpinning theme across all of these changes. Any guesses? Attention. Attention from a consumer point of view, right? What's really happening is you're seeing fragmentation of attention across these 4 waves of changes that we're seeing. There is this concept of snackability that has become mainstream over the last few years, where people are consuming content on the go. And it's more snackable content, more amount of time spent on the platform, but consuming more snackable content. So for me, coming back to the topic today, is if we drop the words around small budgets and crisis and talk about approach to planning, right? Today's marketing landscape is increasingly driven by platforms around us. A lot of you will agree with me that 60 to 70% of today's marketing investments are dominated by 3 or 4 platforms. And those platforms give you a very definitive playground to play within, as opposed to really innovating and pushing the needles on those platforms. So my question to all of you guys is, how has marketing evolved? Forget about what COVID has done and accelerated all of these changes. Let's talk about this ongoing technological advancements and the growth of platforms and this age of walled gardens around us. How has that evolved the way we approach marketing investments? Sachin?
Well, I can speak on behalf of the agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
So agency perspective, and it doesn't matter. Take your pick, whichever multinational brand you can think of. Pre-COVID days, the brand managers, marketing, CMOs, doesn't matter. They would very rarely share a meaningful KPI to the agency. Never. And it doesn't matter. Take your pick. I don't want to name a client over here. But the biggest of the biggest, the billion-dollar brands would very rarely share an interesting enough KPI to say, oh, this is what our achievement should be. I need you to go off and do the marketing, make it cool, make it interesting. That's kind of where it was. Post-COVID, it's more like, let's talk numbers. I want to drive sales. I want to drive engagement. I want to drive impressions, whatever it is. Those numbers are getting a lot more clearer now than they've ever been. That's the big change for us.
I would love to hear a client perspective on this question. There are a couple of clients at the back end, but no, I would love to hear your perspective on this.
From a client's point of view, I think the biggest change is a couple of years before we were considering digital, and it's always been that we consider digital. I feel we were much more focused in planning. So when you would commit to a platform, you would commit to a platform for a year, right? You'd put in your plan for a year, knowing that this is where I want to go with that platform. This is how much I want to achieve. Today, with that, the advancement that's happening in the different platforms, and every day, you know your competitors very well, right? They're launching new things, and the people and the consumers are shifting towards these trends. So we are not committing to platforms anymore. We are committing to trends. We are committing to what's new, because the consumer is shifting, and so should we. If we are not as fast in taking on the trends and what's happening in the market, then the customer is forgetting about you, especially we're talking about digital in that instance.
Fantastic. I think you're hitting on a very important point, and Sachin, I'll come back to your point about visibility and accountability across the board. But coming back to your point about following trends across platforms, are we seeing this phenomena around short-termism, whereby brands are jumping in on trends, whether some of these trends may not even have any affinity with the values and the purpose of a brand, but because we are looking at chasing short-term gains as opposed to strategic long-term equity driving exercises? Is this because we've all become a victim of the top-down squeeze that we're all faced with, where we need to deliver results versus spending money to build a brand equity and affinity? Would love to hear in the client perspective. Maybe Tahir, if you want to jump in on this.
Can you give an example of this? What do you mean in terms
So
of
what we've
jumping on
seen,
the...
so what we've seen over the last 3 to 4 years, and again, I come from an agency background, so I've seen this firsthand myself, is there has been this race to the bottom, globally as well as regionally, where increasing amounts of money is being pushed down to the lower end of the funnel so that we can deliver on measurable, tangible conversion metrics versus spending money at an upper funnel. I remember Ramadan of the past used to be the Super Bowl, season of the region for us, where you would see a lot of industries, telcos in particular, automotive, jumping in on developing these very high production value, emotionally charged TV copies. That no longer happens.
Yeah. So I agree, and I think, look, I've been in Americana for the past 1 year, and sort of managing brands like Hardee's, KFC, Pizza Hut. I mean, these are sort of your established brands, and I think what I've definitely seen in the past 1 year is there's a lot of focus on performance. So performance marketing is coming up as a phrase that's just been sort of said around the organization more and more. So absolutely, it's all about the bottom funnel is about, look, what is it? What is our return on the money? What is our cost per order? What is our cost per acquisitions? So these are the types of KPIs that we are measuring ourselves against. But you are right to a certain extent that there is less focus on developing brands, and there is a lot of focus on, hey, what about today? What about yesterday? So that's I tend to agree with that for sure.
Right, fantastic.
Drive awareness and communication and awareness about the COVID situation and how to wash hands and how to use sanitizers. But at the same time, we've seen brands, for example, like Axe tapping on the cryptocurrency and the tweets of Elon Musk and the Dodge. Like, it depends on the target audience. It depends on the strategy of the brands. It depends on the situation where we are. It depends on the country. Like, for example, in India, you cannot do a communication now that is very light or communicate people having fun. Like, everything should be, we became much more adaptable, much more agile, much more faster in developing things depending on the trend. But yeah, I agree with you. Some brands do not, sometimes they follow they just want to enter trends, but they're not fitting within their strategy. And we've seen it, and we all do those mistakes sometimes. And regarding the metrics that we're talking about, I think they're still very important, and they were very important before the pandemics and after the pandemics for Unilever. But we've seen now a lot more engagement as people are spending much more time home and on their mobiles. People are working agile, so they're much more on their iPad and their social media. So we see metrics in a different way now than we used to see them before.
Fantastic. We've got another point of view at the back.
Since the microphone is here close to me, I just wanted to echo that, and also to your first question on the how marketing has changed. I guess, I mean, the fundamentals of marketing haven't really changed, because we still think about, the brand purpose, the brand essence, consumer behavior, know your consumer deeply. It's just that in the past, the consumer behavior was different. Now it has shifted. And the previous guy who was talking, I don't remember your name, sorry, but you said that now the consumer behavior has changed towards shopping online. For example, we saw the stats, right, because of the pandemic and stuff. So I guess that's why, this is just my thought and my guess, right? That's why the clients are putting more money towards the commerce driving sort of activities and activations and campaigns right now, because clearly we can see that people shop more, or consumers shop more right now. But I think the building brands is not canceled. Definitely short-term goals and short-term, I guess, objective campaigns, oriented campaigns are still, or should still, build into the bigger, brand building, job that we have to do basically as brand managers.
Right. Fair point. I want to steer this conversation further, and I want to get a perspective, from some of the creative agency folks here. Are we seeing a clear trend where the transformation of information age, which generally means that whoever is sitting on a wealth of data points will probably have a stronger say on the development and the shaping of a strategy, which typically is associated with some of your counterparts across media agencies? Are we seeing a clear trend in the market where your media strategy is increasingly dictating what your creative direction should be? Or do we still believe when planned right, when briefed right, when we bring the right stakeholders together, that a strong creative direction can transcend a media approach? I would love to hear this. I think we've all talked about this for years. No one's cracked this. And I personally believe that it is the role of a brand builder or marketeer to bring all of the stakeholders together and ensure that we do this right from the onset. So I would want to hear, the perspective of maybe, publicists. We can start off with that and then hear out from you guys on how are we moving that landscape.
It really goes down to the idea and the objectives that you have for the campaign. A lot of times, media plans are preset, but then you look at the audience you're talking to, you look at your objectives, and you kind of challenge that. Because your typical media plan would be, we want to go on TV, we want to do Facebook, Instagram, and everything. But then you come up with an idea that caters to your audience on simply one platform. Maybe you come up with a TikTok idea, and you don't want to branch it out to other platforms. And you kind of sell that to the client regardless if they had agreed on something different with the media agency. So I guess it's situational. There's no right or wrong there. It depends on what you're communicating.
Great.
Yeah. I just want to add one thing. Definitely what he's saying is very valid. But personally, I've been working for 2 different agencies under the same group. I was at Leo Burnett. I recently moved to Publicis, handling big brands. And yes, I noticed that media has a bigger role to play. So with under our group, it was always the power of one co-working everything with our media partners and all. But you feel from client perspective, they're putting more budget for media versus the creative work. And this means that yes, they are driven, data driven. They want to see clear results. You want to give them return on investment in the fastest way possible. And this is why there's more shift on media more than ever, in my opinion.
So one of the things that I've observed is that, there's a lot more data privacy regulations coming up now, and, people want to preserve their data. So you have a lot of brands wanting to drive more first-party data more than anything else. And that does affect media, and it does affect sort of how we want to come up with our strategies from a creative side, because it determines what touch points you want to be on. A lot of brands are not trying to get us on to drive traffic to websites, to something that they host, that they can own, even though, of course, the ecosystem is still there, TV is valid and everything, but the goal now seems to be a bit more towards first-party data, and it does dictate sometimes how we come up with our ecosystem strategy. And if we say, we want to lead people to this place versus that, before it was whatever touchpoint was the most relevant to the consumer, but now it's also as a business objective, you shift a bit of how you want to come up with your creative, because you want to keep it in mind that it does maybe induce trial on websites or whatever the KPI is, but it is something we're keeping in our mind whenever we come up with the creatives for it.
Cool. Sachin?
From my perspective, from our perspective, it's switched in a good way for sure, right? So it's moved from reach to a purchase funnel. So that discussion now happens. At least a good 50% of the clients that I work with is a co-authored session. So the media agency says, I have a budget and I have an absolute goal in terms of reach. We come on board from a strategy perspective and sit down and talk about how is this going to lead into a funnel of purchase. So it's not just a question of, great, we got 1 million reach on this outdoor billboard. How effective was that, and how far does it pull you down the funnel, and does it make sense for that specific brief that we're working on? So we end up only starting the creative after that session. So strategically, we build that foundation first, 50%.
I personally also feel that sometimes we game the system. What does that mean is, if you go back in time, when digital became a mainstream platform where we started to see significant investments being channeled into the digital channels, you started to see that there was this huge shift towards driving traffic, right? Driving traffic to a touch point, to an external platform. And then whoever we were talking to on the publisher's side would game the system around delivering traffic without really understanding whether that traffic will actually convert into leads, conversions, for an automotive brand, hand raises for test drive bookings, and so on. Then came this notion of views, right? And then everyone became obsessed with driving results across these vanity metrics around X number of views on platforms, engagement metrics, and so on. And I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I say it with all my humility, to be able to map, one, that consumer journey that you referred to, and two, more importantly, how do we assess results, regardless of the size of a campaign? Are we assessing, because at the end of the day, you can assess the impact on conversion bottom line unless you set yourself up to be able to measure across those areas, right? So I think if we can't directly link, if you look at CPG brands, whatever they may be doing on social and video platforms, how do you correlate viewership and engagement to cans moving off the shelf, right? So I think we need to also perhaps take a greater responsibility as brand leaders to align all of the stakeholders on what does success look like. Sometimes a certain channel may be mandated to deliver against a certain remit, but that impact is then closely aligned to a greater impact, which is proxy to the sales metrics and so on. I know you've obviously expressed your views. I would want to hear from you as well. How are you changing the game in that space on ensuring that clear measurement metrics are aligned with the right stakeholders, and you're assessing the performance of each of the stakeholders very objectively? Sometimes the bad media strategy may not mean that it was a bad creative idea, and vice versa.
My answer reflects on what you were discussing a few minutes ago. It's about the role of the marketing head in terms of bringing everything together and assessing and communicating and cascading that message back. Today, it's our responsibility to be very clear when we brief, whether it's a media agency, whether it's the creative agency, on what are the objectives of the campaign and what are the KPIs of the campaign. And I come also from an agency background. I worked in agencies for 8 years, so I know where we stand. Today, everyone needs to be responsible in their own part, right? So the agency needs to reflect on the creative, taking into consideration that whatever outcome they're going to come up with is going to be towards the objective or the goal that the client has set. But then when I shifted back to my end and what I can do, today the conversations that marketeers have in the boardroom are only about numbers. Let's be very clear. They don't care about brand building. They don't care about a campaign being very funny, being very engaging. They don't care about that because the pressure that's coming from the CEO is, are we meeting budgets or not? So the marketing person is that mediator, because we do understand creativity, we do understand brand building, but at the end of the day is how we bridge that gap and talk back and give those numbers to the CEO and give another KPI to the agency. Today I cannot go to the agency, and you were talking about KPIs, right? I cannot go and tell him, listen, you need to get me X amount of sales. It doesn't happen because you wouldn't really understand what is needed to get that. I need to translate those KPIs to the agencies in a way that they understand it, but then talk in another language to the CEOs. That is the struggle that we face every single day, and the more help we get from our partners, the easier it becomes. When the agencies, whether they're creative or media, are aligned to what we want to do, and they become kind of like a consultant to you, helping you, because I might not know all the trends, right? I might not know what is the benefit of a certain platform. This is where they can help and support with definitely the best creative that they can deliver. So it's a very tricky balance, I think, that we need to do.
You're alluding towards a very important dynamic. You said that you want to task the agency for what you know they can bring to the table. Yeah. And then today, the marketeer is faced with a lot of pressure points, right? Today, platforms are becoming extensions of agencies. Clients are in-housing. Clients are also outsourcing, right? There are a lot of these moving goalpost dynamics that we're seeing. In such an environment, how difficult it is to hold accountability to a single stakeholder. So what I'm alluding towards is collaboration. So when you're faced with very complicated marketing dynamics, where most industries and categories are in a state of recovery or in decline, right? Huge pressures on a P&L. How do we ensure that there is fair accountability across the board? Yeah, go for it.
So I think from my perspective, So I think somebody alluded to this earlier, that I think there needs to be a communication piece that I think a lot of the marketers miss in defining the objective of the campaigns. And actually, within the campaigns, you have sub-objectives. So, for example, you have one element which is to drive awareness, one element to drive performance. To answer your question about driving accountability, it kind of links with that. So, for example, from a digital marketing perspective, we use certain channels, like, for example, programmatic, to do display ad. But then at the same time, we're using Google search. Yeah. Now, my cost per order KPIs for those two channels are completely different. So I may be, I'm just sharing with you some details there, which perhaps I might get in trouble for a bit later on. But what I'm trying to say is that my cost per order, for example, on Hardee's let's say in search, might be less than $5, for example. I'm making numbers up. Yeah. But on the programmatic, it might be in hundreds of dollars because of a last click attribution. I mean, I'm getting a lot more detail here. But it is our job to basically tell our leadership to say, listen, don't panic when it comes down to certain channels not performing. And a lot of the times, people above us sort of pull the plug on certain campaigns because the numbers are not coming through. So I think that's, from an accountability perspective, I think that needs to be managed quite well right at the beginning of the campaign. And the second point here is, sorry, I'm taking a bit of time.
No, that's fine.
There's another thing, if you Google it, people talked about this consumer decision journey. So my previous role was working for Philips. So consumer electronics like, oral healthcare. So Sonicare brand, for example. Now, I'll ask an open question to everybody here. How long do you think it takes from a person, from a trigger point to the moment of purchase, how long is that journey? Just have a guess. 2 days, 1 week, two weeks. How long does it take?
Depends which industry you're in. If you're looking at buying food online,
So oral healthcare,
4
for example,
hours.
electric toothbrush, for example, how long does it take? I'll tell you, it's 2 months, 2.5 months, right? How long does it take for somebody to buy a Hardee's meal? I would probably say 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think it's to manage that piece. I think it's very important for the marketers to tell the leadership that look, there are certain KPIs that we're going after and why. And I think once you align that, then I think accountability piece becomes a lot easier and a lot more trackable in that respect.
Tahir, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. You know, we've all talked about that the funnel is broken, it's dead.
Yeah.
Right? You're no longer operating in an environment which is linear. You know, you got to, which is why I think sometimes I personally believe that we're still driven by a lot of legacy ways of how we look at certain channels. I think there's this concept of zero-based budgeting approach, right? Whereby you basically pull away from legacy ways of looking at, you know, your channel selection, your media picks, and your perception in terms of the desired impact they would bring to the table. When the consumer journey has completely collapsed into less than 3 minutes, 4 minutes that you talk about, then I think food for thought, right? For us to go back and understand, one, creativity can be given birth to from any source in the equation. 2 is accountability and objective measurement criteria needs to be applied more holistically as opposed to looking at performance of channels in isolation. You know, again, I may be a little biased, but when you look at you know, TikTok and its performance around, you know, this phenomenal engagement, you know, behavior that we're seeing on a platform, you know, with high amounts of time spent on a day-to-day basis on the platform, how does that correlate to metrics that matter the most versus views? And we've been partnering with, you know, the likes of Ipsos in the region to understand how do we actually move brand and business metrics beyond just media metrics. So I think there's food for thought for all of us collectively to understand how do we change, you know, that approach to measurement more holistically. I want to, because I see a lot of creative folks in the room, I want to talk about how do we define creativity in a small budget campaign that you may have, and how do we assess effectiveness of creativity? Does anyone want to take a crack at this?
It's literally back to what you just said, and I'm 100% believer in that. So you mentioned that, you know, the conversation you're having with your CEO is sort of different from the conversation you're having with the agency. So the conversation that you're having with the CEO is a slightly different conversation from the agency. So this is what I was saying right in the beginning. I feel now it's much more better, more interesting when you throw the KPIs more clearly to us, in the sense we are working better as partners. It sounds very counterintuitive to the agency world, right? So it was like, I don't have those KPIs, so I did nothing wrong, right? And it feels like that's the right way to go about it, but that's wrong. In my head, now that we're working more in a shared space, the client appreciates our work more. We're thriving. We're actually doing a much, much better job. So in my head, the definition of creativity, if it's not linked to that effectiveness category, it's meaningless. It's just cool, fun stuff. And I like to think that today, more than being marketeers, we're salespeople.
Yeah.
And to me, that's how creativity should be defined. Otherwise, it's an art gallery. Great, excellent creativity. Does that link to making a purchase and a sale? Doesn't. Garbage.
Fantastic. Speaking in the spirit of that, do you guys still believe that, you know, your big cinematic ideas, there's this perception, right, that they start off with more traditional media channels, maybe TV, right? Other forms of traditional media as opposed to some of the digital platforms. Do you think that is a prevalent behavior across, you know, some pockets of the industry, where the big idea thinking is still restricted to traditional media channels? I sense you're going to be controversial on this one. Go for it.
The problem is half of my heart is with the agency, half of my heart in marketing. But again, they're two sides of the same coin. I see it, and I see it across agencies. They still, even though they know that their big idea will not be on TV or a film anymore, right? It's more on digital. We still struggle as clients to make that behavior fit in with the budget. So the idea, the agencies, and we're talking about different agencies because I work with different across categories. They will come up with great ideas, but when I'm looking at it, I know that the budget will be, and for me, again, we're talking here about small budgets, right? It's small budget, but it's also efficiency in the budget. Today, it doesn't make sense to have a campaign cost you $1 million dirhams. It's still relevant maybe for some of the FMCG partners. It doesn't make sense for it to cost you $1 million dirhams or $1 million just to be featured on the digital and social platforms and be gone in a week, because you don't want your campaign to be there for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, right? The behavior has changed when it comes to, and you mentioned it, to consuming those media. But then you walk into production, and then the production cost is big.
Yeah.
There is that mismatch. Even if the idea is adaptable, you are still getting stuck with production costs that are not as to the digital behavior that you want to go into. Yeah. If I'm making sense.
No, I'm absolutely right. I think we've seen time and again that there is increasing pressure on all of us to maximize the working dollars, right? Working dollars, unfortunately or fortunately, are associated with media amplification, of which earned media becomes a subset of. So you're absolutely right that there is this constant pressure on any one of us to maximize working dollars. I want to also talk a little bit about, a lot has happened over the last 12 to 15 months, right? We've talked about, consumption media habits have changed for once and ever. We've looked at budget cuts have taken place globally. I was reading a report from Work that talks about that in their 40 years of media monitoring reports, 2020 has been the worst year, where the industry has lost 10% of its advertising expenditure. When you look at our region, MENA, we have shrunk by 20%, and a lot of the industry leaders estimate that the recovery may not happen until the beginning of 2023. So in an age where you're seeing that squeeze, on the budgets, and we're seeing that there is a race to the bottom, right? Increasing amounts of money are being spent towards channels that can drive measurable impact for you. Tahir, what you talked about. Hiba, I want to bring you into the conversation. Sorry to put you into a spot. But I want to understand from you, from where you are at IBM, how are you seeing that trend in terms of the shift in investments into very consolidated, channels that are actually measurable natively because of the nature of what they do, right? Yeah, Hiba at the back.
So I do hope that I don't get in trouble for that as well. So I'll share the IBM point of view and then my point of view. Yeah. So definitely this is what's happening, right? So I think we discussed earlier the move towards performance marketing, more money being put in digital, more focus on metrics, and so on and so forth. So this is definitely happening. I don't think that, as an industry, we switched the way we work, right, towards more of like the product marketing, the brand building, the purpose-driven marketing, and so on and so forth. I think we're trying to do what we used to do before the pandemic, but just do it differently. Yeah. And I really don't think that as an industry, like I've not seen, something, and then, the effies are coming up, so maybe I'm wrong, and then maybe there are amazing examples of brands that have done this, but like just looking into the market, I don't see this major transformation taking place. I just see we're doing the same things in a different way, right? So definitely, yeah, this is definitely happening in IBM, other brands in the region, more performance marketing, more about, channels, more about consolidating things, consolidating activities, more doing about, doing cross, because, from a B2B perspective, our marketing used to be very, market-driven, segments and so on and so forth, events-driven and so on. Now we're trying to be more, bigger, doing bigger things, bigger activities, performance-driven, trying to get the numbers and so on. And I think it will have an impact on the long term, which is not very positive for the industry and for the brands, right? Because I think we lost the focus a little bit on, the big things that need to happen. So definitely happening here, but I'm just hoping this will change soon because I think it will have not very good consequences.
Brilliant, great. I know we're almost out of time. I think just sign-off points, comments from my side is one other dynamic that we've had a huge implication on is organizational restructures as a direct result of COVID. I think it remains to be seen whether as organizations downsized or right-sized, if any of those measures led to measurable efficiencies in terms of processes. I'm sure they did in terms of savings and productivity. Remains to be seen whether those drove upsides and efficiencies. But on that note, I'm going to sign off. I enjoyed the conversation. I think we're all very clear in terms of the challenges that we're all faced with as individuals as well as a collective industry. And I think there's a clear intent from all of you, and we've seen this time and again, for us to continue to collaborate more seamlessly, ensure that there is greater transparency on how success measures look like, and ensure that there is more objectivity in how we build meaningful partnerships that can culminate into growth for our brands. Thank you so much. Stay safe. Have a great rest of the conference.